So I started coaching about 20 years ago. I was working for a human resources consulting firm called Right Management Consultants. I was doing internal consulting, and I discovered coaching and just fell in love with it. I just thought it was a wonderful service. And at that point, it was kind of a fad. And over the years, it's become a trend, and now it's a real job, professional service. And there are literally 16,000 members of the International Coaches Federation all over the world. So the Agile Leadership Network mission here is interesting. I noticed it says leaders at all levels, striving to transform teams, organizations, and enterprises. And I'm going to introduce you to another definition of level as we're going through the presentation today. I think this was written, it was talking about all levels hierarchically within an organization. But there are also levels of development for leaders, and that's going to be our primary focus of conversation today. And I alluded to the change, but really when you look at the change, it's been absolutely phenomenal. It's accelerating. I mean, when you look at the technological disruption, they're already predicting self-driving cars. It's going to blow away major types of the industry, and truck drivers, obviously cabs. The utilization of cars are going to be maximized, and so there'll be fewer cars. The automobile industry is going to be impacted, just beyond belief. You also have, the globalization, the climate change, the environmental changes that are taking place. The acceleration of change requires a different kind of leadership. But it's not only the acceleration of change, it's the complexity and the interconnectedness that is involved in the way the world works today. I mean, you probably are on teams where there are folks all over the world that you're interfacing with on a regular basis. And that connectivity includes an increased level of complexity. That brings us to VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. How many of you have heard of Ray Kurzweil? Ray Kurzweil is a futurist, and he's really into Moore's Law completely, and he thinks that we're going to upload our brains and our consciousness to some larger entity such as the internet within the next 30 years or so. I don't know whether that's going to happen, but the level of complexity is great. And so the question is, with that increased and accelerated change, and within that increase in interconnectedness and complexity, is there a type of leader that can more effectively deal with these dynamics? And the answer is yes, there is. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about what we refer to as leadership agility. And the question is, well, what is leadership agility? Well, in a simple way, it's the capacity to focus and the capacity to move into a broader perspective, and to do that in a very agile way. The graphic here we have is a camera, where a camera can focus in and then come back. So you can focus in on the detail in terms of what needs to be done, but you can look at things strategically. When you look at strategy, there are really two dynamics to that. One is looking at the world holistically, so seeing all of the dynamics around a particular situation in a holistic way. I mean, not only are you looking at the factual stuff, the actual content of what you're trying to do, but you're also capable of looking at the culture. You're capable of looking at all the subjective dynamics as well. The metaphor I use is the idea of carving a road through the forest. And when someone is putting a road on the forest, the person who's actually cutting the road, is executing. But at the same time, there needs to be a perspective around where you're going. What's the future? Where are you headed? So that second dynamic, we've got the first one of looking at things holistically, and then the second one is being able to look at the future. And one of the Agile leadership's principles is this whole idea of planning, but responding to change, right? That's in one of the principles, and this is very much analogous to what we're talking about with respect to leadership agility. So, how many of you have some kind of leadership development program in your organization? Some of you do. Okay, are there 360 feedback? So 360-degree feedback? 360 feedback is something I use a lot, and it's basically where you rate an individual request that their direct reports and their peers and their boss rate them around a number of competencies, leadership competencies. And here we're looking at a set of competencies that we refer to as horizontal, which is basically all of the leadership skills around strategy, around delegation, around decision making, around empowering, and so forth. So that's one approach and a very positive approach to becoming more effective as a leader. But there's another dynamic, and it has to do with growth. It has to do with your development. There's a dynamic that we all are engaged in as we move through our lives that relates to our development. And so when we talk about vertical development, we're talking about moving through various stages of development while at the same time increasing your level of competency. Let's talk about adult development. When I started coaching, I discovered a thought leader, a guy by the name of Ken Wilber, who wrote a book called Integral Psychology. He's written probably 30 books over the years. And he's just an incredibly brilliant thinker. He started his work at the age of 21 with a book called Spectrum of Consciousness, and now he's in his 60s, and he's still blowing going. And when I discovered him, it confirmed something that I intuitively knew all along, and that is that we do grow. We do grow as an adult. So let me ask you a question. I want you to go back to when you were 16 years old. Sort of put yourself in that place. 16 years old. Do you think now the way you did when you were 16 years old? No. Huh? Hope not. If you did, you'd probably be incarcerated for a little bit. Okay. Now the question is, when you were 16 years old, did you know that there was another way of thinking? Absolutely not. You were oblivious to it. So the 20-year-old, the 25-year-old can look back and say to the 16-year-old, I know what it's like to be 16, but you don't know what it's like to be 25, right? There's been a natural evolution, a natural change over that 9-year period that created a completely different perspective around reality at some level, right? The 40-year-old can say to the 25-year-old, I know what it's like to be 25, but you don't know what it's like to be 40. And so forth. The 60-year-old can say to the 45-year-old. You think that by the time you're 45 and 50, you're cooked, pretty much done. Not really. I mean, now some people get stuck, at a certain level of development, and they don't go beyond. You probably have, some in-laws like that. But at the same time, we all at some level are moving forward in our lives with a different perspective, just by virtue of being alive and having our life experiences unfold. So I think that's a useful concept to understand when we're talking about leadership development, adult development, and leadership development. The thing I learned, reading Ken Wilber was great, but when I discovered leadership agility, and I said, oh my goodness, okay, the adult development process, when overlaid as far as leaders are concerned, leaders are at a level of development. And it just all kind of came together, all made sense, particularly in clarifying some things, dynamics that were going on with clients. So the basic idea is that we continue to develop after childhood. The adult stages increasingly involve awareness and consciousness at some level. Sometimes it's hidden, it just kind of evolves at some level. It can be, if you understand the path, it can be accelerated to some extent. Not dramatically, but it can be accelerated at some level. That's what we're going to be talking about. At a particular stage, we don't see the next stage. We're stuck in our worldview and the way things should be. So if we're at a lower level of development from a leadership standpoint, we have that mentality. We really don't understand the distinction in our thinking until we move to the next level. We can look back, the same way that the 25-year-old looks back to the 16-year-old. Right? We only get to see the previous stage until we have gone to a higher stage. And so let's look at these stages of development. The pre-adult stages, we're talking in terms of the 2-year-old. Junior high school is the conformer, all right? And if any of you have any middle schoolers, it's a big deal, if you're in middle school, and you might remember when you're in middle school too, that you're very much into your peer group. That's what everybody thinks. And very frankly, it's gone on steroids now because of technology and social media. My wife is reading a book right now called Teenage Girls, I think it's American Teenage Girls. And this woman went out and interviewed girls between the ages of 13 and 18. And she's reading the book, and we have these 3 granddaughters who are pre-teens, and she's aghast, okay, at what the teenagers, the world that they live in now. And a lot of it has to do with exacerbating this conformist kind of mentality. So at some point we move into this expert mode, and this is when we start talking about leadership. And Joyner has come up with these 5 levels of leadership: expert, achiever, catalyst, co-creator, and synergist. And we're going to talk primarily about the first 3 that relate to something that we can really study and we can really understand. Let's see how this slide works. It's kind of pretty if the animation works pretty well. So there's been a lot of research done on this. The studies have shown that about 55% of the people at an expert level. And I'm going to give you an understanding of what that's about. But and then we have 35% at the achiever level, and then a much smaller percent at the catalyst level. The reason I have a circle there is that these are the 3 that we're going to primarily concentrate on. They're the ones that we can do research on from a corporate standpoint, using 360 feedback processes and so forth. So we're not going to address that much around the co-creator or synergist. I will say that later on in the presentation I'm going to hand out something that will give you definitions and information about the other 2 levels as well as these first 3. There's a couple of things here that I think are really interesting. One is this whole idea of heroic and post-heroic. You've read stories, you've had bosses, you've had people come in to an organization and they're in charge. They've got the cape on, they've got the S on their chest, and they're going to come in and they're going to save the day. They're going to turn this company around. They're going to get everybody straight, right? It's a very egocentric kind of approach. Being a hero, being at some level the Lone Ranger. There are not too many superheroes that are on teams, at least earlier on. Now they have these Avengers that are supposed to be on teams. I'm not sure whether they're on a team or not. But Superman is a lone Ranger, right? He comes in to save the day. Batman, we don't forget about Robin. He's not around that much, And Batman is really the big guy to come in and save the day and capture the criminals and all this kind of stuff. So that kind of mentality is all well and good, but there's a real cost to that, because if you're the hero and you're leading with the answers, and you're second guessing everybody around you, at some point in time, you're going to demotivate the people. People are going to check their brain at the door, and they're going to comply with what you say, right? Because whenever they come up with an idea, you're going to blow it away anyway, right? And they're going to comply because it's less risky to do that, right? And so being the hero is a way of, dysfunctional way at some level, around the capability of maximizing the organization, the capability of the organization. So the post-heroic level is where the ambition is not for yourself. You're not the center of attention. The ambition is for the company. The ambition is for the team. So the team gets the credit. There's a dynamic around the team that is much greater in that kind of context with a leader that's post-heroic than with a leader who is heroic. So can you relate to any of that? I want to get some feedback here. Can you relate to what I'm talking about in terms of that? In terms of the teams that you're on? Any observations or comments or questions at this point? You don't have to have them, but I just figured I'd check in with you. You seem to be paying attention, so I guess it's okay. So. Yes, okay. So the servant leader is the operative phrase for the servant leader is, how can I help you? So they have a much more a mentality that's much more at the post-heroic level, and they're much more inquiring. They're much more able to listen. They're much more able to empathize. So certainly the servant leader model is very compatible with this post-heroic catalyst kind of model. Okay, so let's dig into the leadership agility levels and what the leadership arenas are. What we're doing here is we're looking at the behavior of leaders in these three key areas: in managing change, team performance, and pivotal conversations. We're looking at their behavior and making a determination as to whether that behavior falls into the achiever or the expert, the achiever, and the catalyst level. I'm going to just throw this up here. We're going to go into a lot of detail around it as we proceed through this. So we're going to move forward here. I just want to give you kind of a roadmap of where we're going with respect to the mentality, the competencies, the way folks operate within these three arenas based on their level. So let's talk about the expert level. And we're going to talk first about team development. What does it look like when, at an expert level? Let me talk a little more about this. When we grow up and we move into college, or whatever profession, might not necessarily be college, but we become knowledgeable about something. And that's kind of the path. We become an expert on something, right? How many of you are an expert? Come on, everybody should be raising their hand, right? We're all experts at something, right? We become experts, and if you weren't an expert, they wouldn't pay you, right? You gotta have some intellectual property going on in here in order to make a living, really. So we kind of we sort of have our mentality around our expertise when we're on the job. That's what we're paid for. Right? So we do a good job, and somebody says, "Hey, why don't you come and supervise these people? You're doing a great job. Here's 5 people. Make them happy, make them work, make them productive. Go for it." Right? So what model of leader? First of all, when that happens, do people get any training? Nada. Okay. Just throw them in the pool, let them swim. Right? So what model does an individual have who's kind of thrown in that situation? Who's the expert? Parents. Teachers. And what do parents and teachers do? They tell you what to do. All day long, every day, they tell you what to do. Certainly your parents do, right? And so, so your leadership model, your model of how to lead people, how to manage people, comes from actually 3 things. One is your parents, your teachers, and perhaps the boss that you've had who is operating at an expert level. And so you lead with the answer. You don't have the answer. You just tell people what to do, right? And you don't necessarily maximize their expertise because you have all the expertise. And I've had clients who are senior level people who know the right thing to do all the time. And somebody will come in, a senior exec will come in and say, well, I want to do this. And no, we're not. We're going to do this. No, because they know the right thing to do. Right? And so that's the model for the expert and how you move into that mode. So in team development, for instance, getting others to do things primarily one-on-one, meetings are used for getting information, and a leader makes decisions, kind of a hub and spoke kind of situation. So I'm going to talk about a guy by the name of David. David is the operations manager for an engineering, consulting, and manufacturing company for the offshore industry. And David graduated from college, he went to work for this company, and he's been with the company for 13 years. He was one of the first 5 employees. This is not a big company. But he's running a good chunk of the company. He's running, the manufacturing operations, he's running accounting, a number of other back office kind of things. Does he have any meetings? No. He's running all over the place telling people what to do. And he's exceedingly knowledgeable about the operations. Been there forever, right? So he's very, very knowledgeable. But there's no communication between the people, right? And one of the behaviors that I noticed with David is, what he related to me, and I was in his workplace a lot, was people were always lined up at his office, waiting to come in and get the answer, right? He was a hub and spoke of everything, and not really synergizing or maximizing the interchange between people because he never had any meetings. Expert level. Organization initiatives focus primarily on incremental improvements, inside boundaries with little attention to stakeholders. So here again, it's focused in on incremental improvements. There's no stepping back to see the big picture, no stepping back to deal with stakeholders. It's very much of a focusing in. And incremental improvements, certainly not transformational by any means. Okay. And then pivotal conversations. This is around communications, and there's all kinds of dynamics around how we converse with each other. But there is one thing, one kind of dichotomy, and that is, are you advocating and selling, assertive advocating and selling, or are you accommodating? Are you inquiring? So you have leaders who generally are selling and advocating all the time. They have strong personalities. They tell people what to do. But then there are other types that have this very accommodating kind of approach, and they have a hard time making decisions. They're more feelers, if you will. One example I have is a physician that I coached who was a director of a primary care residency program, and he engaged me to help him get tough, to be able to make effective decisions, because he was leading with his heart all the time. It's okay to lead with your heart. You have to be willing to make tough decisions. And so when he did this, when he got the understanding that there needed to be that flexibility between being accommodating and inquiring and being assertive and decisive, when he really understood that, he moved toward being able to be more powerful, if you will, because this is kind of a more power style. So, success was the day I went in and he said, I fired him. And I gave him a high five, because he finally made a decision to fire somebody he should have fired 2 years before. At the expert level, I'm using David as an example. The operations guy who's leading with the answer, he knows all the answers. There's no real communication. He's the hub, right? And by the way, David was working 6 days a week. And at the end of the coaching he gave me, no longer worked Saturdays, and went home at 5 o'clock, or 5:30 maybe. He was able to learn how to delegate, learn how to build a team in such a way that it was able to take the stress off him to some degree, and to be able to be a little more effective in the management of his time related to his family. So the next one is the achiever level. And the achiever has some shifts that take place. It's a pretty big shifts in terms of the way they think and around these three arenas. So on team development, meetings take place, first of all, and they're important strategic and organizational issues that are discussed. And the focus is getting buy-in. So let me tell you about another guy, another client by the name of Rob. And Rob was the president of a $300 million company in California. He lived in Houston, commuted back and forth for 25 years. And he left the company. He was an accomplished CEO. But he was really operating at the high expert, kind of low achiever level, at some level, at some point. And so, not command and control, but kind of, a little beyond that, but not that far beyond that. So I think he moves into a new situation. He moves into becoming president of a $100 million manufacturing company in Memphis. And the company was in terrible shape. I mean, the manufacturing company, the sales were going down. It was in the middle of within the period of time he was with the company, went down, manufacturing in the United States went down like 50%. This was in 2008, 2009, I mean, like this. He had to deal with a 100-year-old company with legacy third-generation owners. Okay? Have anybody been in a family-owned company? Third-generation owners, you kind of understand the mentality around that. I mean, it's sort of like an annuity for them. They're sucking all the money out of the company regardless of whether it's going down the tubes or not. So he has to deal with this dysfunctional, multi-generational family ownership, right? He's got the manufacturing tanking, right? He's got to make dramatic changes within the company. And he hires a very, very effective team and starts the process of turning this company around. The whole intent was to hire people on the team who were really, really good at what they did so that he can maximize their value. So he was very good at managing change in this situation, trying to get stakeholders buy-in. He was not particularly 100% successful with the legacy owners, the heirs, so to speak. But he was successful in being able to get the chairman of the board, who was kind of controlling things, to go along with the changes that he was making. So that's around stakeholder management, which we're going to talk about a little later. And then he was able to have this assertiveness kind of behavior, and he's a very, very good salesman, but at the same time he was able to flex between assertiveness and being accommodating in order to get what he wanted in terms of managing stakeholders and having the kind of conversations you need to have with vendors. I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, he had a sales force, the legacy sales force, been there 25, 30 years. Everybody's in their early to mid-50s. They come in at 9, have a 2-hour lunch, leave at 3, and they had these accounts that they had had for years and years and years. No interest in particularly growing the company or managing the fact that the company was going down the tubes at some level. So he moved into the achiever level, a little higher into the achiever level, toward catalyst, I think, during this period of time. And the outcome was that he needed an exit strategy, and he managed to get 4 offers on the company, and they were able to sell the company, sell the assets really, and relieve the shareholders of the financial burden of the indebtedness and so forth. So at some level he was a hero, if you will, but at the same time I don't know whether he was particularly appreciated throughout the whole thing by the shareholders. But I could see, as I coached him, I could see him moving in the right direction in this. So how about the catalyst level? Team development, really, there's a facilitation, there's an open exchange of ideas. And the team takes responsibility for the entire organization. So it really is a collective effort If the team is really functioning effectively, there's a high level of emotional intelligence, there's a high level of alignment, there's a high level of collaboration, and there's a huge amount of trust among the team members. And the mentality is not being the hero, not fighting on the team for who's going to be a #1 spot. The mentality is really for the ambition for the company to grow. And if you're looking at organizations transformation, you hear a lot of situations as a consultant. I hear it all the time from my fellow consultants where, the senior leadership says, well, go down to a lower level and fix those people. Well, it ain't going to work. The senior executives need to really come together and shift the culture within that executive team before they can shift the culture throughout the organization. So managing change, it's managing the culture, managing teamwork and participation, positive engagement with a diverse number of stakeholders and within the organization, and getting input from others, not just buy-in. It's not only your ideas, there's a co-creative kind of aspect to it. And then when we get to pivotal conversation, there really is the skill in terms of balancing assertiveness and accommodation, depending on the specific situations. Now, you remember that I said that at 25, I know what it's like to be a 16-year-old, but you don't like to know what it's like to be a 25-year-old. So there is a transcend and include dynamic to this. So as an achiever level leader, I can move to the expert level when I need to. I don't lose that. That's included in the repertoire of management behavior that I have. As a catalyst leader, I have the capability of moving into achiever and expert. And that, there's some agility around that, depending on what the situation calls for. And you might, somebody who's moving through this might shift to various levels, within a week or even within a day, depending on the circumstances. Because you can see that the catalyst level is much more strategic, if you will. Right? So I'm going to just give you a slide just to reflect what each one of these are. And I have a handout that's going to, that I will pass out before we finish, that we're all going to look at, that will be very, very helpful for you. You'll also have this PowerPoint on the website. And I think, if you have any interest, I'm thinking about, I'm recording this, I'm thinking about, putting on the Thinking Partners website as well, if you really want to get into this. So to kind of refresh you, they know the right thing to do. They lead from their authority and expertise. There's a hub and spoke approach to meetings. Does not give feedback. So just for grins, okay, how many of you are individual contributors? Raise your hand. You don't have anybody working for you. Okay, most of you are managers then, right? Okay, terrific. Okay, so maybe I should have everybody close their eyes. Anybody have their boss in the room? No? Okay. So let me ask you, how many of you would say that your boss is at the expert level? Wow. 1 or 2 or 3, okay. You're all managers, right? A good number of you said you weren't individual contributors. I mean, you have people working for you, right? So I'm going to ask you to kind of self-assess a little later on. But so that's the expert characteristics, the achiever characteristics, much more strategic, greater reflection. One of the terms that is used a lot with Joyner is the idea of reflective action. Reflective action, not reaction response. Rather than react to situations, you're responding. So reflective action is certainly part of it. Willing to get feedback. It's another dynamic here around the levels, and that is, my view is that if you have a leader who's not willing to solicit feedback or get feedback, they're not going to be as successful by any means. I mean, you need to have some sort of feedback loop that lets you know how you can improve, how you can do better, how can you be more effective. And then the catalyst characteristics, again, much more visionary, open to new ideas, post-heroic. It's not about over-controlling. One of the things I've challenged people about, and this is a kind of a paradoxical situation, because as a manager, you're held responsible for everything goes on in the organization, right, that report to you, right? At the same time, can a manager afford to be the quality control person for the entire organization? And if you are the quality control person for the whole organization, when do you have time to do anything else? So there has to be this balance. You have to be able to trust the people who work for you, and at the same time, have some checks to make sure things are not going to go off the rails, right? But if you're being the quality control person within the organization, within your organization, you're probably not being a good manager. Because that implies an absence of trust, doesn't it? So, the catalyst characteristics. There are practices associated with each one of these arenas, each one of the levels. And you'll see that context setting, stakeholder agility, creative agility, self-leadership agility. I'm not going to go into all of those. This is part of the 360 process. I'm not going to go all of it, but I do want to address one, because I think it's important for this group, certainly, and that is stakeholder agility. One of the things that I know as far as the Agile principles are concerned is that there's a high level of collaboration with your customers, right? I mean, you have to really, if you're in developing software, there has to be a lot of input and a lot of dynamics going on a real-time basis, particularly if you're going to change, and change is more, there's a bias toward changing rather than sticking to the plan, right? Which is another one of the Agile principles. So the stakeholder management is really an important skill set for any kind of project management kind of endeavor. Let's go ahead and look at stakeholders, and this is kind of a representation of a variety of different stakeholders that you might have to deal with as a leader, as a manager, as a CEO, or as a person who's supervising a team even. So one of the things in terms of coaching that I work with, I have a whole process for people to really do an analysis of their stakeholders in terms of the power dynamics, in terms of the value, what kind of influence that folks can have on the individual success. It's important. So around the leadership agility levels then, stakeholders listening to others' concern, but you're relying on your own judgment and agenda, and it's really around what's in it for me. I'm coming to you, but man, you got to do this for me. In order for me to be successful, the focus of attention is on me, right? And then we have the achiever asks for and considers others' views. They're clearly advocating their own, but they are soliciting other people's views, and they're doing it sincerely. It's just not a matter of manipulation. They're really genuinely interested in what other people's views are. And certainly, as you're managing a project, you certainly are working toward asking for other people's views to make sure that as you incrementally install your software systems, that they're responding to your customers' needs, right? Then we have the catalyst, truly actively seeking out others' views to candidly resolve differences. So there's a negotiation process, and there's a real recognition that you have to have a good relationship with people who are going to be influencing your success. And sometimes it requires you to reach out to people who are not necessarily that friendly, if you will, or maybe might be oppositional at some level, right? Stakeholder agility is a biggie. I just want to give you another example of a client, because I think this one I forgot to mention him, and it's been an interesting journey for this guy. His name is Scott. When I first met him, he was a managing director of a small consulting firm, and he had 10 people working for him. He was an expert in geoscience, a PhD, in geophysical stuff. And the company was one that managed reservoirs. Right? It did all the technical consulting around reservoir management. And I worked with him because he wanted to quit. He wanted to get out of it. He wanted to leave the company. He was at a mid-career level and wanted to just get out. So we worked together for a while. We got him to declare that he was going to leave. He left. You know, small company. He wasn't an owner. So he then went to work for another consulting firm, moved to England, and did very well with that firm. Came back to the U.S. He then moved to one other consulting firm, and I got a call. I had lunch with him one time before. I got a call. He said, "Hey, I got myself into something really interesting." He said, "I am going to be the president of a division of Baker Hughes." Okay, huge company. He had responsibility for all the geoscience for Baker Hughes, and he had to bring in, when there was no organization, he had to bring in the entire global geoscience organization under one umbrella. And the most people that he supervised was 10. And all of a sudden he ended up having 1,500 people and $150 million kind of challenge. Now he did come in. He was beyond kind of the expert level at some point. A pretty sophisticated guy, thoughtful, read a lot. But when he came in, he said, "Man, we need to get after it. I got to learn how to do this." And so we worked for a long time to move through this process of what it's about, being an executive, being a part of the managers that reported to the executive team of a $10 billion company, right? So I saw him. It was just really interesting to see him move through the stages from the expert, the geoscientist, to the supervisor, from the expert kind of level of management through the achiever level, and I think at this point, he's bumping up to the catalyst, and so I'm pretty proud of him for having been able to meet that challenge. So that gives you another kind of take on this. One of the things we did with him, and I do this with another number of clients, is to do a 360-degree feedback. And there's a process by which your peers, your bosses, your direct reports, all the people who are stakeholders can rate you based on your leadership agility level. And it's a very simple 15-minute online survey, and then you come back and get a report. And it gives you a feel for what it looks like. Now, you're not going to be able to read anything on these, but I just want to give you an idea of what the report looks like. You've got the direct reports, the stakeholders, the bosses, the S is self. This person had to rate themselves pretty high, higher than everybody else, so they have a blind spot, don't they? So that's one way that this whole model can be operationalized from a leadership development standpoint, where you can actually do something that will, first of all, give people a path. This is the one that's the neatest thing about this, is that it's not around just simple competencies, not around just horizontal, but it's also around that vertical movement. It gives you a path of where you're moving from a leadership development standpoint. Man, I've really enjoyed this. This has been great. You guys have been very attentive, and it's been a pleasure for me to spend some time with you. I have a thing on my website. I got to get you to see it. It's just a hoot. I had so much fun doing this. When you leave, there's a little flyer that will talk about the leadership team checkup. And if you go to my website and you type in that URL, you will get a 2-minute animation around the offering that I have. Hey!